Hello, this is Tammy, Plays Well with Paper from the Whimsy Stamps Halloweeners design team. And I have this fun bat card to share with you today. It's called a floating card front. And so let's not waste any time and let's get started on the technique. Today's card, I hope, is going to be a quick one and fun if I can remember how to do the technique. So, what you need is an A2 size card base that is top folding. So, this one folds at the top. And then we need some dies. So this is what I'm using. I'm using this die for this technique. So it's a word die with shadow, ink, word, and shadow die. And so I'm going to be using this to actually cut out from the bottom down here. And I hope that I can remember how to do this technique. So I learned it actually watching a video by Jennifer McGuire. I get a lot of inspiration from her. And then I love to transfer that into the supplies that I have on hand. And so I want to use it with the Whimsy Stamps products today. So I am going to be using the word die to cut out at the bottom, and then it will actually be holding the whole card up. It's kind of a floating card front type thing. So I'm going to be doing that. For the rest of the card, this part up here, I want to make some paper. And so I'm using the Galaxy Galore background. So it's a big red rubber stamp and it's just full of stars, all kinds of stars. And I'm going to be using another technique that I learned from Jennifer McGuire years and years ago, and it has become a go-to. I use it all the time. And so that is the iron off resist technique. So I'm going to be using that today with the Galaxy Galore background. And then at the top, I am going to have this darling die set. So this is the Twinkle Scribble die, and you can see it's almost like a wreath. So it's a scribbly circle with stars cut out of it. Love it. So that's going to go at the top up here, and then in the middle of it I want to have one of the bats from the Batty die set. So I think the big one will be a great one to put in the middle there. And this die set comes with several sizes of bats and then several sizes of eyes that you cut out to go in the bats as well. So I'll have the bat in there. So the top will be fairly simple, and then we'll have that bold sentiment that will be holding up the front of the card. And so I hope I can remember how to do this technique. It's been several months and I didn't save the video. So wish me luck, and I want to invite you to come along with me and let's get making. The first thing I had to do was to cut the largest shadow from the Eek word and shadow die set. So I'm placing it in the bottom center of the front fold of the card. I'm going to tape it into place. And then the key to this is to make sure that you don't cut the whole shadow out. You want to leave the top attached to the card front. So I have my platform there, and I'm putting the top cutting plate just up about 1/4 of an inch from the top of that word die, so that it will stay attached to the card. And I'm probably using way too much tape here, but I haven't done this before, so I think I went a little overboard. I wanted it all to stay in place, and so that's why it did that. All right, so I'm taking it over and I'm going to cut it, and then as I'm lifting it off and taking the tape off, you can see that it did cut the word out, but not the whole thing. So there it is, still attached to the card front. And now I need to do one more step. So I'm lining everything up to make sure that I get it straight on my studio mat with my ruler. And I'm putting the edge of the ruler right along where I put the cutting plate, and I'm drawing lines. And if I'd been thinking, I probably could have done this while the plate was still attached with the tape. But now you just take scissors and you cut right up to where the die cut finished cutting. And there you have the shadow at the bottom, but it's still attached to that card front. All right, now I want to make my paper to cover the card base. So I have my Galaxy stamp out there, and I just covered it with clear embossing ink. And I'm using Distress watercolor cardstock, so it's white cardstock, and I'm using clear embossing powder. over the clear embossing ink. You want it clear. And I'm going to heat emboss it. And I decided since I was doing this, I would make several and just see which colors that I ended up liking. I decided to go with purple, and the three Distress ink colors I chose were Wilted Violet, Dusty Concord, and Villainous Potion. I start with the lightest ink and begin blending from the outside with my blending foam. And this is really easy to do on the studio mat because the glass surface is made for blending and to make it easier to blend onto the paper from the glass mat. So you don't go in with the darkest right away, and you don't need to push very hard. It takes a little bit longer if you do this, but it makes the blending so much smoother if you do it slowly and you add layer upon layer. Now that last layer was black soot, and now I want to add a little bit of shine and shimmer, and so I reach for my Distress Spritz. Now remember, these are not colored sprays. This is a clear surfactant liquid that is in there, and the only color comes from the mica pearls that are the Distress colors. So I sprayed that on there, and now I need to let it dry on its own. I don't want to add any heat because that will reheat the embossing. So I'm showing you there that they're dry. None of the pearl is coming off on my fingers. And so here's the iron off technique. So I have a clean towel, I have my craft iron, and I call it my craft iron because I use it only for crafting. And so I'm going to lay the paper onto the clean towel. And this is just Xerox paper, like printer paper that you have. And now I'm just putting my iron, no steam, just heat. And I'm reheating that embossing powder so that it will melt into the paper. And I want to make sure that I got it all, so I'm moving it to a clean side and trying again. It looks like I got it all in the first round. So now if you look at it, you can see that the stars are flat or matte because they don't have any embossing on them, but they protected the white paper underneath so that it resisted any of the ink or the spritz and kept those stars nice and bright and white. And so this is a blue one that I made. I didn't use for the card today, but I'll use it on something later on. So now I want to show you the difference between using the embossing just as a resist and then ironing it off, and how it's just so much brighter once you iron it. Now I needed something for the bat, so I reached for my mica stains this time. They do have a colorant in the stain, and then they have the pearl colors. So I used Specimen is the green, and Empty Tomb is the kind of grayish one on the right. I also needed some paper for the sentiment, the Eek sentiment, and then I'm going to also need some for uh, the Twinkle Scribble die. So I put Spice Marmalade ink on a paper, and then I just spritzed it once. So you can barely see the drops there. It will give it a little bit of shimmer, but it's not overwhelming like the mica stains because of the just that little bit of pearl color that it puts on there. Now I cut those out and I'm attaching them to the middle shadow. So this is, I cut it out in white, and that will fit onto the card, as you can see up there in the top left. And now I'm just putting some more Spice Marmalade onto some Distress watercolor cardstock, and again spritzing it with my Spice Marmalade spritz. So I needed to cut my purple paper down to the right size. You actually will need to measure this to get it to the right size so that there's a mat around it. And once I did that, I went ahead and just did a simple stitch in black on my sewing machine around this piece that I am putting on the inside. That's just a leftover piece. I made two purple sheets, and so that's a piece from one of the purple sheets, and then the bigger piece on the top. Once you have those base pieces down, you can attach the white shadow with the sentiment on that partially cut larger shadow. Now, the Twinkle Scribble die I cut out of that second piece of spiced marmalade so that it would kind of tie in with the sentiment. I think that that pulls in the orange really well. And then I cut the bat out of the Empty Tomb black cardstock and added a few little details that I'll talk about later. And then I wanted to finish off with just a few embellishments. And so I pulled out my Raven Pearl embellishments from This Calls for Confetti, and I added a few to each corner and then inside the scribble die. Can I tell you how excited I am that this actually worked? I love the floating front. So thank you for sticking with me during this. So let's look at a couple of details on here, some of them that I didn't really talk about a whole lot. But first, let's appreciate the beauty of the shimmer. I love that spritz and it just adds just the tiniest bit. I hope that you can see it even on the scribble and on the word there. And the little bat, he looks like I used mica spray on him and he looks like he has texture. And then I added a little bit of detail there with a white pen. So added some fangs, a little bit to what I think would be the inside of his ears. But I just think that mica spray on the heavy stock really added the coolest texture. It doesn't feel texturized. It actually is very smooth, but it looks textured, doesn't it? Now I used a Jelly Roll pen and I added some fangs. I added those little bits to the wings, and then I went over it with a water brush just to kind of smooth it out, and it actually gave it kind of a 3D appearance. I just think he's a charming, adorable addition to the card. And speaking of the card, let's talk about that floating front feature. So the card stands up like this, and it stands up on the sentiment eek. So really, what you're seeing is this part of the card when you have it standing up. And you don't necessarily see this part in the back, but when you take it out of the envelope or something like that, you do want to have something on the back of the card, so that the people can see it. But really, this is the part that stands up and makes the front look like it's floating. I have to tell you, I really enjoyed trying out this technique today, and I think it's really cute for my first floating front card. So I'm looking forward to making more of these in the future. Have you guys ever made one of these floating card fronts before? Let me know in the comments if you have or if you have any tips for me. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this encourages you, if you haven't tried this technique before, to give it a try. We would be so grateful if you would leave this video a like or comment, and if you would be sure and follow Whimsy Stamps on all our social media platforms so you don't miss any of the fabulous products and great inspiration.